Well, welcome back. We're still in this primeval period. And you can think of the primeval period defined in this way that you've got four events and that really define it. And so you've got the creation, then you have the fall, then you have the flood. And now we're going to look at that fourth part of this creation story or this primeval period, and that is the Tower of Babel. So let me share my screen and we'll enter into this. And when we think about the Tower of Babel, uh, we can see its evidence that God had scrambled the languages by the mere fact that when you go to another country that doesn't speak English, that you have to deal with this. But the main idea that we're trying to get across in this section of chapter 11, verses 1 through 9 is this: that Babel reveals mankind's rejection of God and their mandate as image bearers. And this is, I believe, at the heart of what's going on in the Tower of Babel. Or again, that the man and the woman were to represent God and his interests in the world, and they were to take the human chaos of our world and to bring divine order. And they were to do that as they were fruitful and multiplied and filled the earth, and as they then subdued and ruled and expanded the borders of the garden. And what we're going to see in this is that mankind does just the opposite, which is evidence of their sinfulness. So if we look at Genesis 11, 1 through 9, we can begin by looking at verses 1 and 7, where we see from one language to many languages, right? And so in 11:1 it says this: and the whole earth used the same language and the same words. That it was very easy for people to communicate. Whatever the language was, they all had the exact same language and used the same words. Then in verse 7, after the God judges them, it says this: come, let us go down, and we'll look at more of that in a bit, and confuse their language so that they will not be able to understand one another's speech. And so God scrambles the languages. Now you have, in every place, you're going to have a different language, which then is going to make it very difficult for the man and the woman from one place to communicate with others from another. Now, we want to try to begin to understand why this happens. And this is why in verse 4, okay? And again, you always have to keep Genesis 1 and 2 in mind, and specifically what the man and the woman's role were as images of God. And it says this in verse 4 of chapter 11: and they, meaning man and woman, right? All the people said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower, right? Okay, whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad and over the face of the entire earth. Oh no. But when you look at what they're saying, is they are actually trying to undo every aspect of what it means for them to be the image of God, to image God, the verb part of it. And this is why I said when man falls, the image of God is marred, meaning that man can no longer, it's impossible for him to fulfill the verb part of the image of God. Because he will no longer look for God's interest. And that's exactly what it says. Come, let us build for ourselves. It's no longer about God, it's about them. Okay, a city. And what's the point of this city? It goes on, it says that they don't want to be scattered. Well, God said, be fruitful, multiply, and do what? Fill. That filling is scattering so that you can bring the rule and the presence of God throughout the entire earth. And now what they're saying is, nope, we're going to stay put right here. This city is going to be for us, and we don't want to scatter, and that's why we're going to do this. And then it goes on, it says that they're going to want to make a name for themselves, and to make for ourselves a name. So they're after self uh, glorification in that sense, where they should have glorified or made the name of God known. They simply want their own name to be made known. And they don't want to fill the earth, they want to stay put. And they then are going to build this tower that's going to reach into heaven, right? They are going to make a tower that will allow them to connect with the God of their mind, but in a way that's totally different than God, right? So they want to build this tower that's going to go to heaven. They're going to try to reach God in their own way and to have their own new religion. And so then what happens, though, is that we're going to see and we'll get there in a minute, that what God is going to do is he is going to mock them. And I love this. I mean, God has a tremendous sense of humor. And he says in verse 7, come, let us, right? That's the Trinitarian aspect of it. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. The idea is they're building this tower to heaven, but we have to come down to even see that. And we're going to come down and scramble their language so that we can put a restraint on the level of their evil. Because if they can communicate easily with each other, it's much easier for them to then do a bunch of evil in our world. So by scrambling the languages, it's actually both a judgment and an act of grace. It's judgment because he's looking and saying, okay, you don't want to represent me and my interests? Fine. Then I'm going to give you a permanent reminder of what that is like. Every day that you are in a foreign country, you will recognize that there are people that you cannot communicate with. Second is that he's also going to show them grace, right? And that this grace comes from the fact that he is at one point, at some future time, going to restore that. But when you look at verse 9, and it says, therefore, it is called the name Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and there the Lord scattered the people abroad from the face of the whole earth. So the judgment is not only does he scramble their languages, but then he also scatters them. But that was their original covenant that they have from the time of Adam, that their job and their role has always been to scatter throughout the world, to help bring God's rule and authority into the lives of others, right? To represent God and his interests in the world. And so in that sense, by scattering them, it's an act of grace. He's reuniting them with the covenant he made with Adam, with the covenant that he made with Noah, and that they can fulfill the very purpose for which they were created. And so that becomes really important. But it also sets up a need, because in this, it's pointing us towards God's solution that he is going to begin to unfold in Genesis chapter 12 with a name, by the name of a man named Abram, who will later become Abraham. So chapter 11 sees us, again, the problem of sin comes to a head. Man wants to set up his own God. He wants to not fulfill the mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and fill, and to subdue and rule over the earth, but he wants to make a name for himself and not a name for God. So that's how we're going to leave chapter 11. It's rather depressing, but it's getting us ready for chapter 12, which is going to introduce us to God's solution to man's problem of sin. And that is good news.